It was just after dusk on March 9th, 2014, when the last ruddy light of sunset faded behind the jagged skyline of Kuala Lumpur. At home, in a modest bungalow on the outskirts of Subang Jaya, 36-year-old Jonathan John Thompson kissed his wife Maria on the forehead, knelt to scratch behind the ears of their beloved Labrador, Shadow, and smiled at his daughter Lily, who was busy coloring inside the lines of a unicorn princess on the living room floor. "I'll be back before bedtime," he promised, tying the laces of his running shoes. His plan was simple: a quick jog to clear his head, then home in time for dinner and bedtime stories. John never made it back. The morning headlines ran with the words, "MH370 officially missing, all presumed dead." Air traffic controllers in Kuala Lumpur and Ho Chi Minh City reported no distress call from Flight MH370. Radar data suggested the Boeing 777 had vanished from secondary surveillance over the Gulf of Thailand. Despite an intensive search, no wreckage was found, no black boxes recovered. Within days, Malaysia's Civil Aviation Authority announced that all 239 passengers and 12 crew were presumed dead. The phrase felt cold, clinical, an official stamp that the people aboard were gone forever. But back at the Thompson home, Shadow did not understand. Every evening, just as the sun's final glow dipped below the rooftops, the dog would appear at the front gate, ears pricked, tail stiff. He would stand at exactly the same spot where, months before, John had tied his shoelaces. For a full minute, Shadow would let out a soft, yearning bark, just once, before trotting back into the yard, head low, as though he knew his master should have been walking through that gate. Maria tried everything. She moved Shadow's bed away from the front door. She left the porch light on. She slipped small treats into his bowl at dusk. Shadow refused them all until he'd made his nightly trip to the gate. Neighbors began to comment, "Your dog is so loyal," but Maria felt only a mounting ache in her chest. Every bark was a heartbeat echoing absence. Our story begins on a humid April night, 28 days after Flight MH370 disappeared. Maria steps onto the little porch for her nightly vigil. The sky is ink black, the air thick with the scent of frangipani blossoms. She holds a flashlight in one hand and a rolled-up copy of the search map in the other. Above her, the ceiling fan hums, a mundane rhythm that somehow makes the silence of loss deeper. Inside, Lily sleeps in her star-printed pajamas, unaware that her father's name has turned into a whisper among strangers on the news. Maria sets the flashlight down and crouches beside Shadow, brushing her fingers through his soft fur. "He misses you, John," she whispers. Shadow's bark comes, soft but resolute, piercing the night like a signal flare. Then he turns slowly, paws crunching on the gravel path, and leads her back into the cool darkness of the yard. That single bark changed everything. That night, Maria decided she could not wait for government reports or sweeping naval searches to bring her husband home. She would follow the sound of her dog's loyalty. She would believe for as long as Shadow believed. In the weeks that followed, Maria pored over every chart of ocean currents, pings from Inmarsat satellites, debris drifts that washed ashore on Réunion Island and Madagascar. She learned that wire bundles and seat cushions could travel thousands of miles. She studied sea floor topography, satellite weather patterns, even sonar echoes. Late into the night, she pored over photographs of oil slicks captured by radar satellites. Each time her eyes grew heavy, she would feel Shadow's nudge, his way of reminding her not to give up. Every morning, she woke with a new insight, a fresh lead. What if debris floated east before turning south? Could the Gulf Stream have dragged that panel into the Bay of Bengal? In her mind, each hypothesis was a step closer to where John might lie. Yet every lead fizzled. Official search zones shifted as experts weighed in. The Southern Ocean near the Seventh Arc, then further north toward the Andaman Sea. No sign of the aircraft or its passengers, no cries for help, no emergency beacons, no survivors. The world moved on. The news cycle churned outward to other tragedies. But on the Thompson porch, the bark still came, every evening at twilight. It was his heartbeat, repeating faith in what must have happened to his master. One night, a neighbor, Mrs. Patel, pressed her hand against the screen door. "Maria, sweetheart, come inside. You're going to make yourself ill." Maria looked at Shadow lying quietly by the gate, eyes fixed on the distant road. "He won't rest until he knows," she said softly. Mrs. Patel sighed. She had heard the story of the missing pilot's wife and the dog's nightly vigil. It was both heartbreaking and uncanny. "All right," she murmured, "but promise me you'll sleep more than 3 hours." Maria slipped back inside, but lay awake long after the lights went out. She felt the ache of all the empty nights, the world's silence where her husband's voice should have been. Then, just before dawn, the faintest noise, a final bark, barely audible through the narrow window pane, as though Shadow were warning of something unseen on the empty road. Bark, then silence. That bark marked the end of Maria's waiting. At dawn, she would pack her bags and leave for Perth, where a retired tugboat captain claimed he'd seen orange seat cushions washed ashore on a remote beach 3 weeks earlier. She would follow that lead to a deserted stretch of sand where a local fisherman had filmed a metal panel with an odd serial number, the kind that could be traced back to a specific aircraft. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was the first crumb in a trail that would lead her to confirm what she already feared, that John had perished when the plane slipped beneath the waves. Yet amid that fear burned a single ember of hope, sustained by every evening bark, every steadfast pause at the gate. Now Maria would chase that ember across 1,000 miles of ocean. She would track wind and current charts and plead for small unmanned drones to survey reefs. She would lean on the kindness of strangers, villagers on Reunion Island who once gathered debris, Australian beachcombers who discovered a lone suitcase half buried in kelp. Above all, she would trust the loyalty of one dog who refused to move on, whose voice in the night said, "He is out there and I will find him." As the first golden rays of morning touched the horizon, Maria fastened her scarf, picked up Shadow's leash, and stepped into the dawn. The ocean breeze carried whispers of hope and heartbreak. Her journey had begun, and with it, the story of love that refused to be silenced, guided by the nightly chorus of a dog's single, unyielding bark. The sun had barely cleared the Indian Ocean horizon when Maria and Shadow arrived in Fremantle, Western Australia. Cool sea breezes carried the faint tang of salt and diesel fumes from the harbour. In the early morning light, the historic port city looked peaceful, its limestone buildings glowing honey gold, fishing boats rocking gently at their moorings. But Maria's heart hammered like a lone engine, thrumming with anticipation and dread. Every step away from Kuala Lumpur felt like leaving a piece of herself behind. Every step toward the unknown beckoned with slender promise. They checked into a small guest house overlooking Bathers Beach. Maria handed over her passport to the desk clerk, but her mind was already 100 miles away. She laid out in her room the photographs she'd printed from the retired tugboat captain's email. A blurry snapshot of orange foam tangled in driftwood, the faint outline of the cabin door's serial plate, half-buried tire tracks leading into the dunes. Bob Harrison, the captain-turned-beachcomber, claimed he discovered the debris during one of his morning walks more than a month ago. He'd written that the foam panel looked remarkably like what he'd seen in the news, Flight MH370's missing seat cushions, but he'd been too unsure to report it until someone finally put him in touch with Maria. Shadow nosed at Maria's elbow, reminding her she wasn't alone. Together they followed narrow alleys lined with sleepy cafes and wrought-iron balconies down to the water's edge. Gulls wheeled overhead, crying out as they fought over scraps tossed from fishing boats. On the jetty, fishermen cast lines into the dark depths. The tide whispered against the pilings. Maria knelt to scratch Shadow's ears and whispered, "Ready?" The dog gave a single soft bark, an echo of the urgent summons that had pulled them halfway around the globe. They drove north along the coastal highway, wind whipping through the open windows. Shrubland and red sand stretched away beneath a pale blue sky. Roadside signs warned of kangaroos at dawn and dusk. At one deserted pull-off, Maria unpacked her survey equipment, drift analysis maps, a GPS tracker, a handheld satellite phone. She compared ocean current models on her tablet, rotating a digital map of the southern Indian Ocean until the lines converged on a remote stretch of shoreline, exactly where Harrison said he spotted the panel. By midday, the road turned to hard-packed dirt, and the scrub grew sparse. A rusted gate marked the entrance to private cattle land. Maria waved at the lone station hand, who ambled past in worn boots, then parked beside a fence. Shadow bounded through the brush, nose to the ground, searching for a scent only he understood. Maria clutched the little orange ribbon she'd tied to his collar, so she could track him through the low-grown saltbush. 20 minutes later, Shadow lifted his head, barking once, clear and insistent. Maria followed him to a small jumble of driftwood and kelp, half buried at the top of a dune. The foam was there, bright orange against the pale sand, its edges ragged from months of abrasion. Maria's breath caught. With gloved hands, she unearthed the piece, turning it over to find the stamped serial code along the perimeter. It matched the number from the airline's maintenance logs. Her pulse thundered. It was real. It was him. But the moment of triumph was fragile. The cattle station's owner, a stoic man named Clive, appeared in the doorway of his ute. "You got a permit for this?" he rumbled, arms crossed. Maria explained, voice trembling with both excitement and fear. She showed him Bob Harrison's photos, the email from the Civil Aviation Safety Authority in Canberra. She told him about her husband, how he had vanished into the sky one night, and how Shadow had refused to believe he was gone. Clive's jaw tightened. He studied the panel in Maria's hands, then looked out toward the rolling dunes, as if weighing the authority of an interstate stranger against the comfort of his routine. Finally, he nodded. "All right, but I'm coming with you when you document it properly. And no helicopters. This land's sacred to the Wajari people." Maria thanked him, relief washing through her. She sent a quick text to Bob Harrison. "Found it. I'll send photos and the serial tonight." A small crack of hope split the heavy shell of her grief. That night, back at the guest house, Maria sat at a rickety desk overlooking the dark sea. She uploaded the high-resolution images to the investigative team in Kuala Lumpur and the Australian authorities. Her fingers hovered over the send button. She paused, imagining John poring over technical manuals in the cockpit, prepping for takeoff. Imagining Lily's small grin when he returned home. Imagining that moment at the gate when Shadow would finally run into his arms. With a decisive click, she hit send. The email whooshed into cyberspace, carrying with it the weight of every unanswered question. Shadow lay at her feet, head on her paws, as if sensing change in the air. Maria whispered into the dim room, "Tomorrow they'll have to listen." She rose and walked outside. The night air was crisp, streaked with starlight. At the edge of the beach, Shadow's ears twitched. The dog lifted his muzzle and gave one clear bark, steady, unbowed. Maria's lips curved into a faint smile. The following morning, the air was pale and still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Maria awoke before dawn, her mind swirling with questions and expectations. She dressed quickly in a soft cotton shirt and cargo pants, then gathered her notes, maps, photographs, printouts of satellite imagery, and tucked them into a battered leather satchel. At her side, Shadow padded quietly, nose low to the carpet, as though he sensed the weight of what lay ahead. By 7 a.m., they were driving through the quiet streets of Fremantle toward the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, CASA Regional Office. The sun was just breaking free of the horizon, washing the limestone facades with gold. Maria's chest trembled with a mixture of dread and resolve. Today, she would stand before officials whose decisions would ripple across continents. Today, she would demand that her husband's case be treated not as a footnote in aviation history, but as a story of a man, a family, and a dog who refused to give up. The CASA office was a modern building of glass and steel, its lobby humming with activity. Maria checked in with the receptionist, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. She was ushered into a conference room where 3 investigators waited. A wiry Australian with salt and pepper hair named Owen Matthews, a Malaysian liaison officer named Inspector Rahman, and an acoustic engineer, Dr. Elise Fournier, from France's Bureau d'Enquête et d'Analyse. They greeted her with polite nods, their expressions professional but guarded. Owen spoke first. "Ms. Thompson, thank you for coming on such short notice. We received your images last night, and we've been analyzing the serial numbers. It's compelling evidence." He tapped the printed foam panel code against the table. "But we need more context. How did you locate this debris? What led you here?" Maria took a deep breath and recounted the story. John's nightly jog, their life in Kuala Lumpur, Shadow's unwavering vigil at the gate, the tugboat captain's photos, the currents that pointed to the Western Australian shore. She watched Owen and Rahman exchange glances as she spoke, noting the shift in their posture when she described Shadow's bark, the detail that humanized the search. Dr. Fournier interjected, her accent faintly lilting. The acoustic data from MH370's pings indicated an arc roughly 1,800 kilometers northwest of Perth. But debris drift models predicted that lightweight materials could veer eastward, carried by eddies in the Leeuwin Current. "Your hypothesis aligns with our simulations." She pointed to a projected drift map on a large monitor. "This panel's discovery site fits within the margins of error, but it's still anomalous. We must verify it against further findings." Inspector Rahman leaned forward. "Malaysia will fully cooperate with an expanded search in this region, but that requires official sanction. There's bureaucratic red tape on both sides. We need to present a joint recommendation to our respective governments. Ms. Thompson, your presence here is crucial. Your testimony, combined with Shadow's behavior, underscores the human stakes of this operation." Maria nodded, suppressing tears. "Thank you. Anything I can do, provide more data, accompany a survey team, just tell me." Shadow shifted, tail thumping softly against the carpet, as if pledging his own support. The meeting stretched on for 3 hours. The investigators reviewed satellite logs, debris recovery reports from Reunion Island, and hydroacoustic detections of underwater explosions. They discussed mounting a specialized sonar sweep near the discovery zone, deploying autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, with side-scan sonar to map the seafloor. Fuel reserves were finite, and weather windows in the Southern Ocean were shrinking. Finally, Owen rose and offered his hand. "We'll draft our recommendation today and send it to Canberra and Kuala Lumpur by tomorrow morning. If approved, the AUVs could be en route within a week. Ms. Thompson, you'll be the focal point of the press release. Your story, John's disappearance, Shadow's vigil. It will ensure public support for the search." Maria gripped Owen's hand, her heart pounding. "Thank you for treating this as more than just another case file." As she walked back to the car, satchel heavy with official documents, she paused in the lobby. Shadow sat at her feet, gazing up at her with big brown eyes. She knelt and stroked his head. "We're one step closer," she murmured. "One step closer to finding him, or at least knowing what happened." Shadow responded with a single bark, low but resolute, a promise and a prayer. Outside, dawn was fully risen. The harbour glinted with 100 fishing boats, sails and masts framing the horizon. Maria slid into the driver's seat and glanced at Shadow, who settled on the passenger floorboard, head on his paws. The world felt both vast and intimate, the ocean, the currents, the bureaucracies, the families waiting for answers. She thought of Lily back in Kuala Lumpur, how her daughter might open the gate someday and find it empty, wondering where her father was. She thought of John's warm laughter echoing through the bungalow, of the stories he told before bedtime. And she thought of every unanswered question that kept her awake at night. With a firm resolve, Maria started the engine. Ahead lay corridors of power and politics, sonar pings in icy waters, and the unwavering loyalty of a dog whose nightly bark had set this entire journey in motion. She would navigate them all, guided by that bark, until she had the truth. As they crossed the causeway bridge back toward the guest house, Shadow's ears perked. The dog stepped onto the car seat, nose pressed against the window, watching the shoreline recede. Then he gave one soft, clear bark, an echo of hope that resonated through the still morning air. The morning sun had barely crept above the horizon when the research vessel Aquila slipped away from Fremantle's dock, its hull cutting silently through mirror-calm waters. Maria stood at the rail with Shadow tethered beside her, the ocean breeze tugging at her hair. The vessel's sides were painted a stern naval grey, but its decks were alive with activity. Technicians calibrating side-scan sonar arrays, marine biologists sorting through water samples, and deckhands fastening crates labeled AUV modules and spare housings. Amid this bustle, Maria felt an undercurrent of anticipation, as if the sea itself were holding its breath. Below deck, autonomous underwater vehicles lay in cradles, their sleek frames gleaming under harsh fluorescence. Maria ran her hand along the smooth hull of one AUV, imagining it descending into the frigid depths, sonar pulse echoing against the seabed. She pictured the long-lost fuselage of Flight MH370 resting on sandy plains or rocky outcrops, its once shiny fuselage now encrusted with barnacles and coral. Somewhere down there, her husband's final moments had slipped beneath the waves. Now, she was on the brink of potentially witnessing their resting place. On deck, Captain Wells welcomed Maria and Shadow with a firm handshake. His weathered face carried the lines of countless expeditions. "We'll be on station within 6 hours," he said, his voice low and steady. "Weather's in our favor for the next 2 days. Seas under 2 meters, wind less than 15 knots. After that it'll get rough." He pointed toward a large digital chart projected above the bridge's console. A dotted box marked the primary search zone, a remote stretch of open ocean over a submerged plateau 3 kilometers beneath the surface. Shadow barked once, as if acknowledging the map's significance, then settled in Maria's arms as she leaned against the railing. The vessel drifted into open water, ferrying its precious cargo into a world no human eyeballs had ever seen. As they approached the search area, technicians lowered cranes and winches. AUVs, tethered by fiber-optic cables, slid gracefully into the sea with a hiss of displaced air, painting iridescent ripples across the twilight-tinted water. The hours passed in a blur of monitoring screens and hushed conversations. Maria sat in the mission control cabin, legs curled beneath her on a folding chair, eyes fixed on a bank of monitors. Side-scan sonar readings rippled in grayscale, streaks of featureless seabed interrupted by dark shapes, rock formations, gullies, deformities. Each ping brought a surge of adrenaline. Was that twisted metal? A straight edge too perfect to be a rock? At 2:37 p.m., the first definitive anomaly appeared. A rectangular silhouette rising from the ocean floor like a half-buried relic. The sonar image sharpened, revealing parallel ribs reminiscent of a passenger aircraft's fuselage frame. Technicians crowded around, pointing at the screen with gloved hands. Maria's heart pounded so loudly she feared it would drown out the sonar chirps. She swallowed hard, fingers trembling as she activated the AUV's high-resolution camera. Minutes ticked by as the autonomous drone drifted closer. A hush fell over the cabin. Even the hum of machinery seemed to fade. Then, on the central monitor, color images flickered into view. Corroded metal panels etched with faded markings, a broken window frame, a twisted piece of alloy stamped with the airline's logo. A collective gasp rose from the crew. Maria leaned forward, tears pricking her eyes. The cold, muted world of the deep ocean felt suddenly close, claustrophobic, alive with presence. She reached down to stroke Shadow's head, whispering, "We found him." The dog responded with a soft whine, his ears flattened against his skull in unspoken understanding. Over the next hour, the AUV completed a detailed survey. It charted a debris field spanning nearly 200 meters, mapping wing fragments, fuselage sections, and seats overturned like fallen monuments. Dr. Fournier's voice crackled over the intercom. "This is the largest intact section we've discovered. Coordinates are uploaded. We need to plan a manned dive for confirmation and recovery." As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges, the Aquila began preparations for the next phase. Maria stood at the bow, notebook in hand, trembling between grief and exhilaration. In the dimming light, she closed her eyes and imagined John's smile, the warmth of his voice calling her name, Lily's laughter filling their home. In that moment, the ocean felt less like a barrier and more like a bridge. A path that had carried her husband from life to legend and now back into view. She opened her eyes to see Shadow watching the horizon, ears pricked as the sea breeze ruffled his fur. The dog's single bark that evening would not be at the gate but out at sea, a tribute to loyalty and hope. The morning mist hovered low over the deck of the Aquila, lending the vessel's steel-grey silhouette a dreamlike quality against the pale dawn. Maria stood at the railing, Shadow nestled at her feet, both wrapped in thick jackets to ward off the chill. Below, technicians prepared the submersible Nereid, a sleek two-person craft designed to withstand the immense pressure of the deep. Its spherical viewing port glinted under the floodlights, promising a view into a world few human eyes had seen, and none more urgent than Maria's. Clad in a thermal suit and buoyed by adrenaline, Maria accompanied Captain Wells and Dr. Fournier on the descent. As she settled into the cramped cockpit, the walls hummed with the tension of hydraulics and the drip of seawater. Shadow's solemn gaze met hers through the viewport, his single bark echoing softly, as if offering courage. Then with a soft jolt, the Nereid released its mooring lines and began its measured plunge into the abyss. Outside the viewport, the ocean darkened with depth. At first, the world beyond the glass was a bluish haze, but as the meters ticked downward, the light drained away until only the submersible's floodlights pierced the void. Tiny particles drifted in the beam, detritus of distant life, before vanishing into the black. Maria's breath caught in her throat. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sub's internal hum and her own pounding heartbeat. After 20 minutes of descent, a faint relief map appeared on the forward sonar. Dr. Fournier's voice crackled through in soft, French-accented English. "We are over the debris field. Descend another 50 meters for optimal viewing." The Nereid eased downward along the rugged contours of the seabed. Then through the thick glass, they saw it. A tangle of corrugated metal and marine growth, an airplane's skeleton spread across the sand like a giant's rusted bones. The wingtip, broken off long ago, lay nearby, its jagged edge pointing away, as though gesturing toward some unspoken horizon. Maria's fingers pressed against the glass, tracing the outline of a window frame where years ago a passenger might have looked out into the sky. Captain Wells guided the sub gently closer, angling the lights to illuminate the fuselage's side panel. There, amid encrusted rivets and coral, was the barely visible logo of the airline, an enduring emblem beneath layers of time and pressure. Maria's eyes brimmed. "That's him," she whispered. "That's John's plane." Dr. Fournier activated the sub's robotic arm, careful and deliberate. The arm extended, its metal fingertips brushing away debris from a section of the fuselage. Maria watched as the panel cleared, revealing a serial number matching the maintenance record for the very aircraft that had carried her husband. She exhaled a sobbing breath. "We're here," she choked. "He was here." For the next hour, they documented the site in meticulous detail. High-definition cameras captured panoramic sweeps. Sonar pulses marked the boundaries of the debris field. Maria directed the sub to focus on one area, the collapsed cabin doorway where she imagined John's final movements. Phantom beams of light traced the outline of a footstep-sized indentation in the silt. Too small for a diver's fin, too precise for natural erosion. Her heart ached with the thought that her husband might have stood there, bravely assessing the situation seconds before fate intervened. As the final images were stored, Captain Wells initiated the ascent. Maria's vision blurred with tears as the walls of the Nereid carried them upward, away from the wreck. The light above grew brighter, the hush of the deep replaced by the muffled roar of the ocean's surface. At the deck, Shadow gave a soft whine as the hatch opened, his way of welcoming Maria back from the void. She bent to hug him, her uniform damp with seawater and her soul washed by grief and relief. Later that afternoon, on the Aquila's deck, an official ceremony unfolded. A small gathering of crew members, investigators and journalists assembled around a carefully hoisted piece of fuselage, a section of the aircraft's tail, its paint chipped but its lines unmistakable. Maria and Captain Wells stood side by side as the panel was secured. Maria placed her hand on the cool metal. "Thank you for bringing us here," she said softly, voice cracking. As the sun dipped toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the deck, a final item appeared. A small sealed box containing personal effects retrieved from the wreck. A pilot's cap badge, a charred pocket knife. Maria opened it with trembling fingers. Inside lay a single item of deeper significance, John's flight logbook, its cover waterlogged, but its pages intact. Her name and Lily's appeared in the first entries. Wedding anniversary flights, family vacations, the plan for that fateful evening run. Each word was a reminder that he had lived fully, loved deeply. That night, Maria sat by the deck rail, the logbook open on her lap, its pages illuminated by the ship's lanterns. Shadow rested his head on her knee as she read aloud the entries she knew by heart. The ocean stretched boundlessly before them, a mirror of stars reflecting the grief and hope that wound through her soul. She closed the book and looked at the tail panel secured behind her. Proof that her husband's story had not disappeared into the deep. Above, the sky blazed with constellations, and Shadow raised his head, gave one clear, steady bark, this time not at the gate, not on the dunes, but under the vast canopy of night, an echo of loyalty, love, and the journey that had carried Maria through darkness to truth. The dawn was pale and cool as the Aquila steamed toward Fremantle's harbor, its decks quiet now that the flurry of dives and data gathering had ended. Maria stood beside Shadow under a low steel awning, watching the shoreline draw nearer. Behind her, the recovered fuselage fragments lay secured in reinforced containers, artifacts of grief and closure. In her hands, she cradled a faded photograph of John and Lily on their front porch, his arm around her waist, Lily clutching his finger, now slightly creased at the edges by hours of careful handling. Every mile brought her closer to home, yet every wave beneath the hull felt like a reversal of time. She remembered the first bark on the porch gate in Kuala Lumpur, the jitter of hope amid unending uncertainty. The tugboat captain's hesitant email, the glow of computer monitors that first showed metal at the bottom of the sea, the roar of air compressors and submersible motors that unveiled John's final resting place. Now, after more than 3 months of tireless searching, she carried both the wreckage and the promise of answers back to where Lily waited. Shadow padded beside her, ears tilted forward as if attuned to thoughts she hadn't voiced. At each turn of the deckhand's knot, his gaze flickered toward Maria's face, steady and patient. When she closed her eyes, she could still hear the sub's floodlights cutting through the deep, could still feel the shotgun's snap of emotion when the camera first revealed that broken window frame. She had wept then, and she wept now, Tears for the man she lost, tears for the daughter who had loved him, tears for the dog whose loyalty charted their path. By midday, the vessel docked. A small crowd gathered on the wharf, CASA officials, Malaysian liaison officers, journalists clutching notepads and cameras, a handful of shipyard workers who had cheered as each AUV returned to deck. Rising above the murmur of farewells, Maria's voice trembled as she addressed the assembled. "My husband was more than a number in a missing person report," she said, lifting the framed photograph. "He was a son, a father, a husband, a pilot who cared deeply for every person aboard his aircraft. Today, thanks to my faithful companion Shadow, to the tireless crews of the Aquila, and to all who refused to give up, we bring a piece of him back to the world." Shadow sat at her side, head high, letting out a single bark that rippled across the dock. Cameras flashed, and a hush fell. Maria placed her hand on his head. "He barked every night until he knew we were safe," she said softly. "He guided me here." Over the next week, the process of official identification and repatriation unfolded. Experts from the Australian Transport Safety Bureau and Malaysia's Department of Civil Aviation worked side by side, meticulously cataloguing each recovered fragment, each personal effect. Dental records confirmed remains. DNA testing matched remnants of clothing fibers retrieved near the fuselage. John's logbook, carefully dried and flattened by forensic archivists, revealed handwritten notes, flight checks, weather assessments, a final scribble in the margins. "Clear skies tonight." Lily flew into Perth with her aunt, wide-eyed at the dusty red earth and the endless sky. When Maria first held her daughter close, Lily asked to see her father's things. In the sterile environment of the mortuary facility, Maria showed her the cap badge and pocket knife, whispered stories of the adventures they had planned. Lily traced the embossed logo on the badge with a trembling finger. "He wore this when he first flew me in a little Cessna," Maria explained. "He kept it in his pocket for luck." Lily nodded, eyes bright. "I know he's happy we found him," she whispered. The day before they left Australia, a ceremony was held at a quiet beach under a steel-grey sky. A shallow grave, prepared in consultation with maritime archaeologists, lay waiting at the edge of the sand. Family, investigators, ship's crew, and even the station hand Clive, who had first granted access to the cattle station dunes, stood in a loose semicircle. Shadow sat at the very front, his paw pressed against Maria's leg. Maria knelt beside the grave and placed a small, polished wooden box atop the linen drape. John's personal effects and a handful of sand mixed with seawater from the dive site. She read from Lily's favorite bedtime story, one John had told her countless times, about a brave sailor crossing stormy seas to reach his daughter's side. With each word, her voice found strength in memory. When the story ended, she stood and brushed sand into the grave. Shadow barked once, soft but certain, as if affirming the farewell. Someone released a flock of white doves. They spiraled overhead, calling out for a moment before gliding toward the horizon. Back at the airport, as Maria and Lily boarded the plane for Kuala Lumpur, Shadow settled at Maria's feet, eyes luminous with both sorrow and pride. Maria tucked the photograph of John and Lily into her journal, new beginnings inscribed alongside heartache. As the jet's engines roared to life, she whispered, "Home awaits." Shadow lifted his head and gave one final bark that reverberated through the cabin, a salute to loyalty, unwavering, and a promise that love endures beyond the horizon. The weeks following the sea burial passed in a blur of homecomings and farewells. Back in Kuala Lumpur, the Thompson household felt both fuller and emptier. Lily chattered non-stop about her father's big adventure, while Maria moved through the rooms as though walking through memories. Every corner held a trace of John, his running shoes by the door, his pilot's wings framed above the desk, the well-worn copy of Treasure Island on the nightstand. Shadow, once hyper-vigilant at the gate, now patrolled the yard with relaxed dignity, but every dusk he still ambled to the threshold and gave a single soft bark, before returning inside. At Maria's insistence, the Malaysian Department of Civil Aviation organized a remembrance ceremony at Subang Borneo Field, where John had flown countless training hours. Uniformed officers and fellow pilots stood in formation beside the runway as the sun rose in pastel streaks. A formation of 4 Cessna trainers flew overhead in tight diamond pattern, trailing white smoke that spelled out JTHOMPSON. Lily, perched on Maria's shoulders, clapped with delight. Shadow sat obediently at Maria's feet, his chest gently rising and falling as he watched the sky. Afterward, Maria was invited to speak in the maintenance hangar, where John had spent mornings pre-flight inspecting engines. She spoke of her husband's dedication to safety, his passion for teaching new pilots, and the quiet way he made every passenger feel at home at 30,000 feet. She swiped a lone tear and glanced at Shadow. The dog's eyes met hers with deep understanding. "It's because of him that we found answers," Maria said. "And it's because of you," she cupped her hand around Shadow's muzzle, "that I never lost hope." As months passed, a formal joint report by Malaysian, Australian and French authorities was released. It confirmed the discovery site, detailed the drift model evidence, and provided closure on the sequence of events leading to MH370's tragic descent. Maria read the report cover to cover, marveling at the precision of sonar scans and oceanographic data. Yet for her, the most meaningful sections were the personal testimonials: Bob Harrison's weathered account, Captain Wells's expedition log, and Dr. Fournier's scientific narrative. Each described Shadow's nightly bark as the catalyst that transformed a vast, anonymous search into a human crusade. Lily's school organized a memory quilt project, where classmates stitched squares bearing messages about hope and remembrance. Maria and Lily contributed a bright patch embroidered with a dog's silhouette and the words "Bark at Dusk." It hung prominently in the corridor, a reminder that loyalty can bridge oceans. Shadow sniffed the quilt on the way to drop off, then sat obediently as Lily waved goodbye. One evening in late November, as Malaysia's monsoon season began, Maria attended a symposium on aerospace safety. Representatives from airlines and regulatory bodies filled the hall. At the podium, she recounted her journey, not as a technical lecture, but as a story of love and determination. She spoke of the dog who latched onto hope and would not let it go, of the strangers who became allies on distant shores, and of the moment she realized that closure was both an end and a beginning. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Several delegates approached afterward with tears in their eyes. That night, as rain drummed on the roof, Maria slipped into John's study, now repurposed as a quiet reading nook. She found Lily curled up on the leather armchair, asleep under a soft blanket, a dog-eared flight manual open in her lap. Shadow lay at her feet, head resting on Lily's sneaker. Gently, Maria closed the book and stroked Shadow's head. "Thank you," she whispered. The dog's tail thumped once against the floor, an echo of reassurance that love endures beyond loss. In the months that followed, Maria began volunteering with a maritime search and rescue foundation. She shared her story with families still awaiting answers, guiding them through protocols for ocean drift modeling and reminding them that even in the vastest emptiness, a single bark of faith can light the way. Shadow, now a locally famous canine, accompanied her to workshops where he greeted attendees with a dignified posture and, at sunset, a single, steadfast bark. As the anniversary of John's disappearance approached, Maria planned a small gathering at their bungalow. Friends, family, and members of the search expedition would circle under strung lights in the garden. Lily would read her father's favorite bedtime story. Shadow would take his place by the gate, barking once at dusk in tribute. It would be a bittersweet celebration, an acknowledgement of loss, yes, but also of the enduring bonds that carried them from that fateful night of March 9th, 2014, to the open hearts of all who refused to let the story end unread. At twilight the evening before the event, Maria and Lily stood by the gate, draped in lantern light. Lily held a small lantern of her own, its glow dancing across Shadow's attentive face. Together, they listened. At precisely 7:15 p.m., Shadow lifted his head and let out a single clear bark that rippled across the quiet street. A promise kept, a vow renewed, and a sound that would echo through their lives forever. The sun had barely crested the rooftops of Kuala Lumpur on that crisp December morning, when Maria stepped onto the broad steps of the Civil Aviation Authority headquarters, Shadow at her side. A light breeze carried the scent of blooming frangipani through the manicured gardens flanking the entrance. Maria's palms were cool against the invitation envelope she clutched, a formal request from the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, to present her family's story as part of a global safety symposium in Montreal. Only months earlier, she could never have imagined herself here. An ordinary wife turned reluctant expert on ocean drift patterns and marine search protocols. Even Shadow, whose single bark had sparked their journey, seemed to bear the weight of expectation as he sat obediently by her heels, tail thumping with quiet confidence. Inside the glass-walled lobby, she greeted familiar faces, regulators who had once offered condolences, now extending congratulations. She felt their eyes flick toward Shadow, half in amusement, half in awe of the dog whose vigil had cut through bureaucratic inertia. Photographers from Malaysian press snapped a few images before Maria ducked into the elevator, her heart fluttering as the doors slid shut. On the top floor, she found a simple conference room arranged with chairs in a semicircle around a podium. Behind the podium stood a projection screen emblazoned with the ICAO emblem. She set her laptop down, connecting it to the projector. Slides of ocean current charts, stamped debris photos, annotated drift trajectories. At her side, Shadow lay on a soft mat, watching dutifully as she prepared. An hour later, a diverse audience of aviation experts, search and rescue coordinators, and bereaved family members filled the seats. Among them were two women whose expressions she recognized from years of news coverage, mothers who had lost children on missing flights, now drawing solace from one another in the dark aftermath of uncertainty. Maria inhaled slowly, recalling the moment she first realized that the disappearance of MH370 was not just an accident report, but a fracturing of countless lives. She began softly. 3 years ago, my husband Jonathan Thompson boarded Flight MH370 on what was supposed to be a routine repositioning flight. When he didn't return, the official declaration labeled him presumed dead. But each night our dog Shadow stood at the gate and barked once, his way of refusing to accept absence. A gentle ripple of empathy passed through the room as she shared the photograph of Shadow at the gate, ears pricked, eyes bright. As she navigated through the technical slides, she watched seasoned engineers lean forward, tracing drift lines with their fingers. She explained how she had cross-referenced Inmarsat satellite arcs with seasonal monsoon currents, how orange foam found on Australian coastlines led to a targeted AUV survey, and how that survey ultimately located the wreckage site 3,800 meters below the surface. She highlighted the importance of integrating canine behavior studies into human interest timelines, a suggestion that drew amused yet earnest nods from the audience. Midway through her presentation, she paused and pointed to a slide showing the joint Malaysian-Australian-French report cover. This report is more than a technical dossier, she said. It stands as a testament to what families can accomplish when treated as partners in the search process. Bureaucracies move slowly, but a single act of faith, no matter how small, can cut through red tape faster than any directive. Afterwards, during the Q&A, Dr. Leela Hassan from the Malaysian Meteorological Department asked about expanding drift model partnerships between national agencies. A former NASA oceanographer probed the room on real-time debris detection sensors. Shadow raised his head each time someone addressed Maria directly, his tail sweeping against the carpet in support. When the final question was answered, Applause surged like a wave. That afternoon, as Maria and Shadow strolled through Montreal's historic old port, she reflected on how far they had come. She recalled sitting in a cold Perth hangar, clutching the orange foam panel, feeling the weight of possibility in her hands. She remembered descending in the Nereid, glass port lit by floodlights, revealing twisted metal and coral growth. And she remembered the moment she gently laid John's cap badge into the sandy grave on that distant beach, offering both farewell and triumph in that single gesture. In Montreal's chilly air, she paused beside the St. Lawrence River, watching twigs drift past on the current. She knelt to scratch Shadow behind the ears. "We've started something important," she murmured. "We've shown that persistence, guided by human love and a dog's loyalty, can reshape the way governments search for the missing." Shadow gave a single bark, the echo of a promise that continued to unfold. Several days later, Maria's recommendations would be adopted into ICAO's new best practice guidelines. Formal inclusion of family liaisons in search task forces, funded research into innovative drift detection technologies, and a policy mandating transparent communication timelines. Global aviation authorities would cite the Thompson Protocol in workshops from Singapore to Santiago. But for Maria, the greatest measure of success was simpler. It was the sight of Lily coloring golden retriever silhouettes on new memory quilt squares back home. It was the way Flight MH370 was no longer buried under layers of speculation, but acknowledged as a personal story of loss and resolve. And it was Shadow's nightly bark, still echoing at their gate, a steadfast reminder that hope can be spoken in a single, unwavering sound. The humid dawn drifted over Kuala Lumpur like a soft promise, threading through the dense canopy of rain trees that lined the Thompson driveway. Maria stood at the gate with Shadow at her side, the dog's ears alert as ever. Today marked the 2-year anniversary of Flight MH370's disappearance, a date inked permanently on every calendar, yet still too raw to pronounce without catching in the throat. Inside the bungalow, Lily stirred in her bed, sunlight dancing across the quilt, bearing the embroidered silhouette of a barking dog. She emerged, rubbing her eyes, hair mussed from sleep, and bounded toward Maria. In her small hands, she clutched a stack of pastel-colored cards, each decorated with glitter and heartfelt messages. "Happy anniversary, Daddy," read one. "We miss you, but we find hope," said another. Lily draped a hand-drawn portrait of her father over the gatepost, John's gentle smile framed by fluffy clouds. Maria swallowed the lump in her throat. She had planned a simple ceremony at the Subang Jaya Memorial, not a public spectacle, but a gathering of those whose lives had become entwined with Flight MH370's legacy. Family members, investigators turned friends, the retired tugboat captain Bob Harrison, and even Clive, the cattle station owner who had quietly supported the search. She had also invited members of the new International Aviation Family Liaison Network, created out of the Thompson Protocol she'd championed at ICAO. By 8:30 a.m., guests began to arrive. They paused at the gate to admire Lily's artwork and the memory quilt fluttering on a clothesline between two poles. Each square bore a hopeful message: find the light, never give up, and remember the love. Shadow greeted each person with a dignified nod, as if offering silent encouragement. The ceremony opened with Maria reading a letter written by a family in Chile whose brother was lost in a remote Andes crash. They described how the Thompson family's journey had inspired them to press their government for a more transparent search process. Though separated by oceans and cultures, the two families shared the same yearning, answers that bring peace. Maria's voice wavered as she closed the letter. "We stand here not only to remember John," she said, "but to honor every family that has placed their faith in hope, even when darkness seemed absolute." Next, Captain Wells spoke via video link from aboard a research vessel in the Southern Ocean, where he was testing new drifting buoys. He recalled the day he first met Maria on the deck of the Aquila, how Shadow's bark had cut through the whine of generators, and how that moment had shifted the entire mission's momentum. He announced that the latest generation of buoys, named Shadow probes in homage to the Labrador, would soon be deployed across international search zones to track surface currents more precisely. A round of applause echoed through the courtyard. Bob Harrison, now in his 70s, with a weather-beaten face full of warmth, stepped forward to share his reflections. He told the story of his early mornings on the Western Australian beach, of the day he hesitated to report the orange foam panel until he learned about Maria's plight. "I guess I was waiting for my own bark," he joked, drawing laughter and a few tears. He pressed a small hand-carved wooden whistle into Maria's hand, a gift symbolizing the call to action that had united so many. Inspector Rahman and Dr. Fournier joined the line, each offering updates on ongoing collaborations between Malaysia and Australia. They spoke of joint training programs for search and rescue teams, integrated satellite monitoring centers, and an international debris analysis database accessible to all member states. Their words underscored how a single family's determination had reverberated through global institutions, altering protocols and saving future lives. As the sun climbed higher, the group formed a semicircle on the soft grass. Maria stepped forward, holding Lily's hand. She opened a small wooden chest containing soil from each key location: the Subang Jaya Gate, the dunes of Western Australia, the deep sea site at 3,800 meters, and the quiet beach where John's remains were laid to rest. One by one, she and the attendees poured the mixed soil into a bronze vessel set at the memorial's center, a symbolic merging of worlds, of grief and healing. When the last handful of soil drifted down, Shadow raised his head and let out a single clear bark that resonated like a bell. The moment rippled through the assembled crowd, binding them in shared remembrance. Lily placed her drawing of her father atop the bronze base, and Maria placed the wooden whistle beside it. Later, they gathered under a canopy for tea and cuilapis, layered cakes whose vibrant hues reminded Maria of the layers of memory they had peeled back together. Conversations flowed from technical debates about drift model algorithms to personal anecdotes. A writer who had chronicled John's flights in a memoir, a pilot trainee who had taken solace in the idea that perseverance could breach even the deepest mysteries of the sea. As the afternoon waned, Maria walked to the edge of the garden, where a small fountain burbled like a whisper. Shadow sat loyally by her side. Maria reached into her pocket and withdrew a new photograph, a candid shot of John, laughing with Lily at a seaside carnival. She smiled softly, watching droplet ripples in the fountain's basin. "Your story lives on, John," she murmured, her fingers brushing the bronze vessel. "In every act of courage, in every bark of hope, in every life it touches." Shadow gave one last, steady bark, no longer a plea for absence, but a clarion call to remembrance and renewal. Maria closed her eyes against a surge of gratitude, then opened them to see Lily racing toward a group of children eager to hear stories of her father's bravery. The future lay ahead, layered, complex, but buoyed by the enduring bonds forged in sorrow and strength. The first light of January 1st, 2017, broke across the Kuala Lumpur skyline in soft peach and lavender hues, as if the world itself had paused to honor a new year and a new chapter for the Thompson family. Maria stood in the quiet of the pre-dawn garden, Shadow at her side, listening to the muted chorus of cicadas and the distant hum of early traffic. Behind her, the bronze memorial, now adorned with shells from the dive site, driftwood from the Western Australian dunes, and the woven memory quilt, glowed softly under the rising sun. In just a few hours, family and friends would gather for a small celebration, a naming ceremony for the new Search and Rescue Training Centre established in John's honour, and the inauguration of the first Shadow Probes buoy network station along Malaysia's eastern seaboard. But in this hush before the ceremony, Maria allowed herself a quiet moment to reflect on how far they had come. She remembered the night she first realized that John was gone, the way Shadow's single bark sliced through the stillness of their porch, etching a promise into the dark. She remembered the tangle of grief and determination that propelled her halfway around the world, from the tugboat-scattered sands of Perth to the abyssal plains of the southern Indian Ocean. She remembered the solemn submersible hatch sliding shut, the hush of the deep, and the moment the wreckage emerged on the screen, proof that absence could be transformed into presence, and that the dead could teach the living lessons of courage and love. Now, as she inhaled the damp fragrance of frangipani blossoms, Maria felt the weight of those memories crystallize into purpose. Beside her, Shadow nudged her hand. She knelt to scratch behind his ears. "We did it, boy," she whispered. "We kept our promise." The dog gave a single clear bark, tonal and hopeful, before settling against her leg. Inside the house, children's laughter drifted through open windows. Lily, now 9 years old, had invited her friends for pancakes and storytelling. Lily was practicing her lines for the ceremony. "My daddy taught me that even in the darkest depths, hope can find a way to the surface." Maria smiled at the thought and smoothed Lily's curls before stepping back toward the path. By 8 a.m., the courtyard was alive with color and warmth. Bunting in shades of navy and gold fluttered between palm fronds. A banner read, "Thompson SAR Training Center," in honor of Jonathan Thompson. Uniformed officers from Malaysia's Maritime Enforcement Agency stood alongside civilian rescuers, and representatives from the ICAO and CASA exchanged greetings with local dignitaries. At the center of it all, Maria and Lily took their places. The opening ceremony began with the hoisting of a new flag, half emblazoned with the airline's wings, half depicting the silhouette of a Labrador. As the flag caught the breeze, Shadow stepped forward and let out his signature single bark. Cameras clicked. The assembled whispered in admiration. Maria stepped to the podium, Lily at her side, clutching a small, hand-painted model of a buoy. "Today, we honor my husband's legacy," Maria began, voice steady. "John believed that every flight, every journey, carries responsibility, not only for those aboard the plane, but for the families who wait at home. When he vanished, our world was torn apart. Yet through love, determination, and the steadfast loyalty of one dog, we found a way to bring him home. Now we dedicate this training center to the men and women who will go out into storms, into darkness, and into the unknown, so that no family remains without answers." She gestured to Lily, who placed the painted buoy at the base of the podium. "And this," Lily said, holding the model aloft, "is the first Shadow Pro buoy. It will track currents and help guide search teams to where they're needed most. A beacon of hope in a vast ocean." The center's director, Captain Aziz Rahman, unveiled the polished plaque. "In memory of Jonathan Thompson, pilot, husband, father, and friend. May the light of his courage guide all who answer the call of duty." The crowd applauded as Maria and Lily cut a ribbon woven with sea blue and morning sky stripes. Shadow wagged his tail, offering another bark of approval. Afterward, guests toured the new training classrooms, where modules on drift modeling, debris identification, and canine behavioral studies were displayed side by side. One corner held a glass case containing the orange foam panel and John's flight logbook, reminders of how a single dog's nightly vigil had altered the course of aviation history. As the ceremony wound down, Maria slipped away with Lily and Shadow to the garden's edge. She knelt before the memorial, brushing a hand over the etched names of loved ones who remained missing from other tragedies, a testament that the center's mission extended beyond one flight. Lily placed a fresh flower at the base, and Shadow sat beside them, ears alert under the mid-morning sun. Lily reached up and hugged her mother. "I think Daddy would be proud," she whispered. Maria nodded, eyes glistening with pride and peace. "He is," she said. And he'd be so proud of you. They sat in the gentle warmth, watching classmates run through the fountain's arcs, rescuers demonstrating life raft deployments, and buoys bobbing offshore. The future felt as open as the sky, an expanse of possibility charted by love, guided by memory, and illuminated by a single unwavering bark. The dawn of new beginnings had arrived, and with it, the promise that no disappearance need ever be faced alone.